Welcome to Wise Beyond Bitcoin, where we cover the crypto neo news, education, and opportunities. My name is Lucas.
And my name is Ryan.
And we're going to do a follow-up. I would suppose this is a bit of a macro outlook video as well. We can say it's definitely
fellow traveler.
Yeah, a fellow traveler. It's a big picture look on Bitcoin as money. Bitcoin maximalism is a term that's brought up a lot. And what that refers to is one who only sees value in Bitcoin as a digital asset or as the future money, the digital money to move towards.
Yeah, and that the others are going to just be temporary blips that will eventually fade away because there can only be one ring to rule them all, correct?
Right, pretty much. So we're gonna talk about that aspect, although there may be other versions of Bitcoin maximalism that I'm not familiar, but that seems to be the overall argument. Now we've got other playlists, not just about Bitcoin maximalism. We do have a macro playlist, but we've got others. How to start secret. If you're looking at new innovative blockchains that have privacy, this is the one to take a look at. And we walk you through how to get started in DeFi, how to provide liquidity, stake, how to pick validators, secret NFTs, this new innovative, very, very innovative dynamic protocol in space in blockchain in crypto, because what can be done with NFTs with baked in privacy, you just can't mimic and fork on other EVMs. So it's a very exciting time on what's being experimented there. And yeah, airdrops, opportunities, even when the market's correct, consolidate. If you're doing your own research, you will find some projects that are building a lot of value and some great things happening. And do your own research, because this is not marital advice, commercial advice, financial advice, commercial, legal. It's just educational, entertainment, information. We're sharing our perspectives and our views. And if you see something that we don't, please drop in the comments. If you appreciate it, drop in the comments and hit a subscribe, like, notification, all that love to help spread it around. But we're really going to share right now what we feel about the concept people bring. A lot of people have said, well, let's start with money. What is money? Because what's said a lot is Bitcoin is a better money. Bitcoin's the perfect money, or Bitcoin's the ultimate money, or Bitcoin is this great money replacement. And so let's kind of get into what people generally think are the three basic functions of money, and maybe one dynamic that's not mentioned in these three, and why. To start with.
Yeah,
on the
let's
top.
do it. Well, yeah, this is something we love talking about. Big part of what we studied in school. And so this is going to be kind of a return to, familiar ground, familiar territory. So yeah, one of the first big functions of money is a unit of account. And what does that mean? Well, it's a way of, it's like a record keeping. Think of it as, it's who gave what to who owes what to who. If you go back to barter and you think of a time before money, you can imagine there, theoretically, this is all theoretical, but imagine, people are exchanging goods for goods. So you say you have eggs and someone else has some cheese, and you come in and you agree to make an exchange. And you could even imagine that happening across time, such that, maybe your eggs are ready and their cheese is not. So you give eggs now and you get cheese in a month, so all these kinds of exchanges could occur, but you would need a way of reckoning and record keeping and keeping track of what has been given and what is owed. And one of the ways that money accomplishes that is by being a unit of account. Instead of writing down bushels of wheat or dozens of eggs, you can just reckon in terms of a money, of a dollar or a euro or a pound,
gold, silver, whatever it is.
Yeah, or gold and silver. And you could even do it in cigarettes or seashells. So there's various ways, but regardless, money it serves to keep track of exchanges and to record debts and credits. And that's what being a unit of account is all about. There's a debit and a credit side, or an asset and a liability side. And so this is just a way of reckoning these things. So that's what that means. Further on, so we've skipped over a big one, medium of exchange. This is every bit as important as the unit of account. And what a medium
and very connected, because
you couldn't divorce them from each other. But a medium of exchange is just a it's a regime or a set of rules or a set of customs or a media, right? That is generally, that's the word, generally accepted as being money, so that if this item or this thing is given up, it is considered to be payment. And it's the pathway through which payments travel, right? And this is customary, a medium of exchange in one place and time. It might vary, depending on where you're at and what time you're there. The medium could be one thing in one moment and then different in a different era. So it's not constant. It is all historical custom, essentially, is what determines what's a medium of exchange, right? And there's a lot of politics that goes into that too, but that's not important.
It serves what you were
this.
mentioning earlier. The medium of exchange, it allows people to facilitate value without having to have the chickens for the rocking chair as a
Right.
medium of exchange. It allows people to exchange.
One way to think of it is it breaks up the it allows us to separate the barter transaction across time. So if you were in a situation where someone needed the eggs and you had, immediately for their cheese, right, you'd have to have both people present and you'd have to have both items present. You'd sit in exchange. But if you have money, now you can sell your eggs and retain this medium, this item, which then can be used at any time to affect the other end of the exchange, right? So it takes a barter transaction and splits it up across time and makes it a lot easier, because you don't have to have the goods.
Which we talk about later, but when you get into economics, you get into having computers and cars and bridges and telephones, capital creation itself is possible because of being able to have a unit of account and being able to take value,
bridge that time value. Right.
So it's important to be able to communicate that value over time, have that medium of exchange that can be used a month later, 5 months later, 7 months later, 10 years later for a project.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because we should go over this before we get past this section, because another way that money serves as a unit of account is by determining whether or not a certain expenditure of resources makes sense or not. So imagine there's a bridge that you're thinking about building to connect two banks of a river together, so you can have trade across a region, perhaps. And you could build the bridge out of a variety of resources, and through the money, through monetary accounting and through cost accounting and through economic calculation, you're able to determine which mixture of resources is efficient or is economical, right? You could build a bridge,
speculate and take the risk, and find
that
out
too,
later
right,
whether or not it was, and then you can.
And through the monetary accounting, you can determine whether or not you made something that was worthwhile or whether or not you wasted resources. So that's another way it serves as a unit of account.
Totally.
And then the store value.
It kind of ties in with what we were saying, a medium of exchange and unit of account over time, right? Because the store value is something that you can hold it, and then it will maintain. You're locking up your labor. If you're saving you work for 10 hours a day for this many days, and you put that much aside, you're able to take that energy and that value of that labor contained and save it for another time. And obviously, usually when you lock up purchasing power, there's a rate, there's an interest rate you can benefit by growing that and saving it like a seed, right?
And now, of course, with the way that money works and the way inflation works, there is a small loss over time, so it's not going to retain its value completely. But the whole system works well as long as that rate of inflation is within a certain bounds. It's only when it escapes that bounds and crosses over into a hyperinflationary or a severe inflation, where that's when the store of value function breaks down. And that's when you hear about stories like in the old German Republic, the Weimar Republic. There would be people who would have wheelbarrows of money that they would say they'd be moving between stores so they could buy things with. And then the old joke was that somebody came out and their wheelbarrow was gone, but the money had been dumped on the ground,
Because it was
and
worth
it's
more.
because the wheelbarrow was the valuable thing, not the money.
Right.
And so that kind of gets to the point that if something is no longer a store of value in a reliable way, then that will no longer be money.
Right.
That it needs to be a somewhat of an efficient store of value for it to retain that monetary property.
Right.
And if it doesn't, a medium of exchange can quickly become demonetized. Right.
I say so. And you mentioned Weimar Republic, and that's the hyperinflation that's often talked about what happened there, and we can experience definitely some massive inflation, depending. But I would say with all the ADHD that's been prescribed to the population, it probably wouldn't be as hyper. It'd be a little bit, toned down.
Right.
That was,
Yeah. Relaxed inflation.
relax.
Yeah.
I don't know where I was going with that.
Well, so we've talked about money. That we could talk about types of money. Why don't we just go over that briefly? You've got the modern type is fiat, right? So
yeah, they say
fiat money.
commodity, and we're going to get into that because when you
Okay.
talk about gold or silver having been the money that precedes fiat, modern fiat,
Right.
because it was the gold backed dollar, and you look at what separates commodity money from fiat money. Let's kind of get into that.
We'll talk about that. Yeah. Okay. Well, so commodity money is is money that has some use that is a commodity before it was money, right? So it's an item that would have value apart from being money, that would have either industrial uses or jewelry uses or some it had some other use, and then later on became money. So it's a commodity that was developed and became money. And then so with that would be gold and silver is the perfect example of that. And there's others. So you could in prison, cigarettes are a great example of a commodity money. And then the so what's the opposite of this would be fiat money.
But let's talk about how there's a great bridge how
Mm.
commodity became fiat, because paper money, paper notes, instead of walking around with gold, what would happen is you'd have warehouses that would secure and store gold, and they would give you a receipt for having, even if you're holding cigarettes, I've got a receipt for having 6 cigarettes, or I'll pay you. You don't have to walk around with the actual cigarettes or the actual gold.
Sure.
So the fiat, the paper money, was the handing out these receipts, the paper, then the bank would have it. And it was if the bank would start handing out more paper receipts than they actually had in the vault, and more people came for those receipts, that's when bankers would get in trouble if there was a bank, right? But fiat money got its story from paper being printed off of commodities. So a lot of people, when they talk about 1970 and the dollar being backed by gold and going back to that, that's where it has that history. There was a tie from commodity fiat, and I think it's important because we're going to draw this correlation.
Yeah, we should talk about the 30s, how this played out.
Bring back exactly the 30s, how this played out, and we're going to mention how this applies directly to blockchain and crypto and this new.
We're going off on a tangent, but it's going to get brought back to crypto and modern events quickly. Stay with us. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the gold standard, because there hasn't just been one. There's been iterations of the gold standard, and I think that's kind of where we're going with this, right? So the initial gold standard that we all tend to think about, well, I'm not gonna speak for you, but the one that is kind of the most commonly the longest, had the longest period of time wearing its existence. This is broadly the 1800s, and it comes to an end really around 1913, right? The early 1900s, and there's changes that were made in the 1890s as well. I think that we don't need to talk about, but these are the dates really when this transition started, right? So the first gold standard is known as the classical gold standard, and this lasted right up to World War I. Essentially, was the end of that. And then the standard that emerged after World War II, we had Bretton Woods, we had a new monetary meeting where all of the powers that came out of World War II kind of got to talk about how the new world was going to look, right? And Bretton Woods created this new standard where the U.S. dollar was treated as good as gold internationally, right? And other nations treated the dollar as their reserve currency. The dollar became the world reserve currency in this period. So prior to that, the pound served this role, And if you wonder what a world reserve currency is, it's the transaction currency that settles disputes between nations at the international level. So lots of times we're talking about energy purchases, cross-border energy purchases, but it's
Oil.
also
Oh, you're thinking.
the the currency that that people invest in, right? So you hold treasuries and bonds in dollars, right? So it's really about this period was when the dollar they even call it the dollarization period, right? So what happened with gold in this time is really interesting and is going to be the model I think we're going to refer to going forward with what we expect with Bitcoin. But to put it in real short and simple terms, go ahead. I'll pause.
Point. No, you brought up a great point. So I just want to add to what you're saying as a world reserve currency and how it's worked as a species of payment, for cross-border energy or debt settlements. You're hearing major voices around the world already talk about Bitcoin as the universal property, right, or the next. So it's already being accepted by national governments. It's already being spoken about by world banks. In many ways, Bitcoin's already been accepted verbally. It's already been really philosophically, Bitcoin has been accepted as the digital asset of value.
It's certainly being discussed that way by some very prominent people, right? Sure. Whether it's the Michael Saylors of the world or others, but yes,
or leaders of national governments, or
right, El Salvador,
or bankers talking about, not saying anything about ERC20 tokens or this EVM chain or this IBC network. They're the word that, this politician is now being paid in Bitcoin. Bitcoin's now being accepted for taxes in this state. Like, Bitcoin is the digital asset that's spoken as the premium world reserve currency. And while this is about Bitcoin maximalism, right, and what is money, we do agree that Bitcoin is the original value driver of the cryptocurrency digital asset framework. So, Bitcoin absolutely serves, no matter which way one goes, the idea of Bitcoin maximalism or not, Bitcoin serves a huge role in as a foundation, and very well could be the unit of account that is used. I would say it could be a unit of account that's used for other digital.
I think definitely one.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But whether it'll be the or the only, that's hard to say.
It could be a unit of account without being a medium of exchange, is what I'm saying.
Sure. That's right. Yeah. And I think that's where we're going to flesh that out. I think that's where we will be heading, right? If this thing plays out. But before we talk about that, let's talk about how it played out in the 30s, right?
Yes.
So there was we're familiar with the Great Depression of 1930, the early 30s. And if you're really interested with gold and history of gold, you'll know that in 33, there was a seizure of gold. And there was an act passed, basically made it illegal for private individuals to own any gold, right? You could own certain coins that had like an ancient or an antique value, a numismatic value that you were kind of grandfathered into. But as far as holding gold bullion or gold ingots or anything like that, that was now made illegal. So gold as an investment vehicle was made illegal, and it was confiscated. So we were talking about bank deposit raids, talking about balances at savings institutions, various ways this played out. But essentially what it was a giant confiscation of gold. And what else happened was the dollar was not completely separated from gold, mind you. It was only separated at the level of the citizen, at the level of the individual. Right. If you were a large net worth individual, there was still some pathways for dealing in gold. And is also, if you were involved in trade, if you were involved in any kind of foreign trade, there was also a lot of settlement happening in gold still. And if you were a foreign central bank or a foreign investment banker, there was pathways to redeem your dollar assets for gold. So really it was kind of like a two-tier system gold for these people over here. The dollar will have a gold basis for them. But if you're one of these people who's not part of that lucky few, then no, you're left with these gold with these certificates, these paper certificates that used to say redeemable for so much gold or silver, but now are not. So that was the big transition. So
it was 20 years. The Federal Reserve was created in 1913.
Right. And then 20 years later.
And then 20 years later, it was like, whoa, we've printed so much. There's no way we can back up the gold. So when people go about how we got to trillions of dollars in debt now, just understand, once the Federal Reserve, the private bank system was created, the inflation, the fiat system that allowed for private money creation, it's been very inflationary from that point forward. So much so, sure. 20 years later, it's like, whoa, we got to take the gold from the people, because we sure can't give them any gold back. But don't worry, don't worry, governments, we still got you. Don't worry, don't worry. And they said,
and that lasted for what, like 40 years?
Yeah, it lasted for about 40 years. They're like, okay, well, if you're going to take their gold, sure, we'll still,
So and then the 70s, 71, Nixon ends the last vestiges of the gold standard, closes the gold window. And now there's no international gold dollar exchange anymore. And it's purely a completely fiat money. And so what does the word fiat mean? Or what does it entail? And it really, you could look up the word and get the exact meaning, but from what I remember, it means just by the will of. It's like, it's my will that this be so, right? Like the king's fiat, the king's will, let it be done, right? And so what fiat money is money that exists because of a commandment or because of a legal reason, right? And it's because you have to pay. Well, it's a law that you have to accept this note for all debts, public and private.
I mean, not to say that you have to be religious, but they admit. I mean, it says "In God We Trust" on the paper, and they also say that the only thing backing the U.S. dollar is full faith. So
right. In their taxing ability. That's what you're having faith in, is their ability to tax.
They got a good record of that.
And they have a pretty strong record on that. Yeah. So, I mean, it's maybe not misplaced.
Speaking of Confiscation Act. All right. So anyway.
Let's talk about, now we've talked a little bit about Bitcoin. We talked about gold and the gold standard and the classical gold standard. We talked about the gold exchange standard. I didn't use that term, but that's what this interwar period created, this gold exchange standard, which led up and broke down in the 70s. And that was at the end of that, we entered into the modern era now of monetary history, where all nations are printing unbacked paper money that has no commodity backing of any sort. And a lot of them pyramid on the dollar is their reserve backed, is their core asset that's treated like gold, right? Because that was the custom. It had always been treated like gold, and we have a memory of that, right? And it kind of holds over.
Many are already openly moving away from the dollar, and
no doubt
others. So that's a whole nother story. But one thing I wanted to bring up real quick as we move forward, whether we talk about gold or cash, fiat, or silver, these others, unit of account, medium of exchange, store of value, those three conditions are descriptive
properties.
Those properties, right? They apply, but there was another property of money that was never described because it was embedded, implied in every single one prior, and that's privacy. The reason we talk about secret network or look at crypto and blockchain for those areas that help add that level of security and safety to this technology, it's that as a medium of exchange, as a money, privacy has always been a natural feature of people being able to exchange value, regardless of which ledgers they were keeping between their business or private life or family, being able to exchange value.
Well, let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Let's make it clear. Go back to gold coins. If I'm walking around with some coins in my pocket and I bump into you and I buy a bottle of mead, and I'm giving you a gold coin, there's no there's no one seeing that, right?
Right.
It's not, there's somebody that's watching, of course they saw it, but if
Sure.
we go, if we're in private and we don't talk about it to other people, there's no record of that transaction.
And
Now we can,
it's not a big deal. It's like, oh, hey, here
yeah,
you go. Sure, fine.
it's a private transaction,
And it
right?
happens even today in the world. People go to a lemonade stand,
Sure.
all over the place.
And even with the fiat system, it continued to
Right.
be embedded. Now,
Right.
not completely, because we have things like credit cards and debit cards and checks,
Sure.
but at its core, the paper layer of that system was anonymous, right? You could take $1 and go spend it at the store, and nobody had any record of that dollar came out of your pocket,
Right.
or and when it went to the next person down the line, the store didn't know where it went,
Right.
right? And but so all this privacy was just, like you say, embedded, and I believe that is why it's not it made explicit. It's because it was never consciously considered, because they hadn't thought of what a money would
Right.
look like that didn't have it.
Right. So
Right.
in
Sometimes you have
economic
to live through
textbooks,
that, you know?
exactly. They don't talk about it in textbooks because it was just something implied. So now when many people say, oh, Bitcoin is the perfect money because look, store of value, medium of
And
exchange,
decentralized, all these things, but decentralized too, right?
decentralized, code
Yeah.
is law. Now we have to worry about the inflation. All those points are true, and it's a great move forward. However, it doesn't have that privacy feature that's
Right.
and B, let's talk about the correlation between if Bitcoin is being deemed by institutions, Michael Saylor, Elon Musk, world governments, politicians, if it's being deemed as some kind of new universal property,
Yeah.
world reserve asset that needs to be held up by the hundreds of millions by these large, intermediaries. It's, first of all, it's completely gone away from the original
Right.
bank,
Well, let's talk.
bank, anyone get your miner out and let's all get your own wallet and let's create this new. I mean,
Well,
that
it's not going to be permissionless. It's not going to be. You won't be probably Let's talk about. So this is really what's interesting, I think, because you're right that it's not going to be, if that's what Bitcoin becomes, it won't look like it does now,
Right.
and it can't, because of the fact that a world reserve currency or a national monetary unit is going to come under national political authority, which is going to mean that the taxing authority is going to want to know, whose transactions these belong to, what wallet is this registered to, all of the kind of things that we consider to be part of the mainstream financial system would now have to apply to Bitcoin, right? And so what kind of conclusions would you draw from that? What are we likely to see? Something similar to what we saw with the confiscation in the 30s?
Oh, absolutely. Well, first of all, people, even Bitcoin maximalists, understand that the network is not scalable. It requires Lightning networks and other layer solutions. So you would have a confiscation. It would not be, nobody would be transacting in Bitcoin directly because that would be held by institutions. You turn it in just like you turned in your gold, and there would be
Right.
CBDCs or some other deemed, that would be more for uses, and the institutions or the banks would hold the Bitcoin.
Now, maybe the institutional players would have access to having some Bitcoin, right?
Sure.
Because that's how that tends to go, right? There's always that separation between those that are more equal than others.
Right. So I could see it being as a world reserve backing, but if that's the direction they go, I mean, if that's the direction it goes, right? As a maximalist, from a maximalist perspective, but from a non-maximalist perspective, Bitcoin still has a huge value to the ecosystem and as part of that exchange process.
Let's imagine for a moment that the maximalist position plays out. We're wrong or maybe we're right, but we're right for the wrong reasons, and it plays out, right? And that becomes the reality. What do you think? How do you think that plays out? Do we see some nationalized CBDCs collateralized by some fraction of the confiscated Bitcoin, or do we see people like now just downloading wallets and just sending it anonymously or quasi anonymously, right? Which way do you think that? How do you see that playing out?
Well, let's think about how it would work, right? Because the idea is that anyone could mine and anyone could join the network. But the reality is that mining's become so expensive that most of the mining is done through these big factory farms. It's really not easy or profitable for someone to just flip open,
No,
grab a computer. So the minting, the creation of money isn't really that decentralized.
no,
A lot of the new money printing is actually more centralized than when it was maybe mining gold, where anyone can just go to a river and
sure.
grab some. I mean, the reality is most of the Bitcoin minted is now coming through very controlled through nation states that have access to huge power resources, and they have these huge farms where they're mining it by
And
the
eventually they will run it. I mean, eventually it will all be mine too, right? So
right.
that'll eventually will come to an end.
Right. And the question is what would people, it's already not viable for people to use Bitcoin to be the unit, to be the medium of exchange.
Right. That's
So,
why Litecoin and Dash and all these
so
others
for,
exist.
so to imagine, I mean, in the maximalist world, I don't even understand how it works, right? Because in a Bitcoin maximalist world, you're still not using Bitcoin.
Right.
You're still having some types of layers built on top of it. I guess it's just the foundation, right? But
Right.
in that regard, I think that maximalist position requires regulation, to creating it to be the world reserve currency or this new universal
Right.
property. I think, and then it'd be easy to state for point of sale transactions, right, in commerce, to state, well, no one accepts Bitcoin. All Bitcoin from businesses is turned in. What people accept is this CDB, these approved digital
Sure.
Ripple
It'll
probably.
be the rippleification. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah. And well, the other thing I would like to highlight is go back to the privacy part of it too. If Bitcoin were to become some kind of, future money, the monetary standard of the future, the fact that it's this public blockchain, it just, what we're doing is now basically creating our own financial enslavement, right? Or maybe not, maybe that's too far. Maybe that's hyperbolic, but
It is going to the Orwellian 1984
yeah,
route. The point is
right.
that if you think Bitcoin itself is the solution in a world reserve currency and it's the only one, then it's really missing out on the original ethos, the idea of this new decentralized technology that everyone in the world could equally partake in, that the inflation rate was easy to see and no one could
Programmed.
manipulate. It was programmed, code is law. We completely move around that.
Wasn't the idea to take politics out of money?
Right. Take
Isn't
politics.
that a kind of easy way to say it?
That was supposed to be it. So the whole idea is now lobbying governments to find out which one they'll deem as the backing of the next one, is kind of defeating the purpose, right? I mean,
Well, yeah, well, it's because this was created to smash the ring, and now they're saying, well, we want to make this the new ring. And so, well,
right.
no, we're that's what we're trying to get away from. And I think this is probably a good time to kind of talk about the other model of money that we've been fans of, right? So there's this notion of money as either commodity money that the nation state controls, classical gold standard, right? Or it's a fiat system that's nation state organized, right? Fiat legal tender, and that's what we have now. But those are the kind of the competing visions. You got tribes, you got the fiat fractional reserve banking people, and then you got these gold standard people,
Right.
and they have wars together in economic journals. And then this maybe not so much now, but in the 80s, this was a big deal. And
It's still
it still
on.
is.
Sure.
It's still going on, right? Maybe not the same steam, but still being discussed, right?
The same groups are still talking about it. That's for sure.
For sure. Yeah. But what gets missed in these discussions often is this other notion of denationalizing money altogether and getting out of this commodity fiat false duality, and considering what just opening up the space to competition might look like, and what would a system of denationalized, privately produced, managed monies, how would that work, right? And would that work? And there's been some work on this, believe it or not. There's a great book by Nobel winning economist, Friedrich Hayek. His name is Denationalization of Money, the Argument Refined. You can find this, we'll leave links, but you can find this at the Nakamoto Institute. This is a great read. Basically lays out the case for competition and choice in currency, and the idea of separating politics from money, and having it be a private, competitive market, right? So let the consumer decide. And the thinking is that through this competitive process, we will get, the incentives are better, and that the outcome, the money, we'll get better money. That's the thinking. Maybe less inflation, more predictable price level movements, and maybe the interest rates won't be as gamed or politicized, right? And we would get a better product out of it. That's the thinking. And then there's another book which we will bring your attention to, by a student of Hayek, or a man who was greatly influenced by Hayek. His name is George Selgin. His book is called Good Money, and he takes a look at a period during English history where private mints were able to provide a source of money when that was scarce, when gold and silver was scarce in this period. And so through this private minting period, a competitive ecology took place, and the monetary problems were sort of dealt with and adequately. And it's an instructive case study of what competitive private money might look like, and why it could work. So it's dated, but it's definitely lots of lessons and lots of timely and relevant points are there. So definitely worth looking at.
And you can even understand how, if Bitcoin is the reserve asset, the new denationalized asset that's used for taxes, for people to collect as a property, as an asset that's valued, worldwide, you could still see a flourishing multi crypto asset, market.
Sure.
Where
it's not the only one.
They're valued in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the unit of account for this new digital asset space. So whenever people are paying, instead of actually having to have Bitcoin, they can pay their debts or whatever they owe to others. If you owe taxes, if you owe this, whatever it is you owe, you can pay it in this crypto or that crypto. So it could be easily made to be depoliticized and denationalized, where Bitcoin is the
unit of account,
but to stay out of the way. See, it would be healthy to allow these other blockchains and cryptos to flourish and function.
Sure.
And not to have decreed for code to be law, and to allow.
Well, I think that's a good thing. It's kind of not. It's good to wrap. Well, not wrap. We don't need to wrap it up, but it's good to make this next point. Is that, because we don't know which of those products and projects, and which of those game theories, and which of those tokenomics designs is going to be the one that's going to work better than the other. And because some won't be good money, others will be decent, and some others might be even better. But we won't know that beforehand. So it's through this experimental, entrepreneurial, open-ended kind of process where we discover which combinations of attributes works for something to become a good money, and which don't. So it's that question of, well, what is the what's the right answer, right? Because we don't know. And I bring this up because of the fact that we were already talking about Hayek, we're already talking about fiat money, and we might as well bring up the knowledge problem, because it looms large over these issues.
Especially in a new technology we're all learning the new language, the new jargon. It's just emerging right now. So talk about the knowledge problem.
So the knowledge problem, briefly stated, is this notion that we live in this world of uncertainty, that so much of what's relevant to knowing the right answers of how things should be distributed, how resources should be distributed, so much of that is embedded in people's minds, and it's not something that you can just go measure, like how many inches is this, how many feet long is this building. It's not that kind of a question. It's contextual, and it changes, and the context is relevant to what people think and believe and want, and all that is in flux, right? So the knowledge problem is something that faces any decision maker who's trying to make a decision over a sufficiently complicated situation with enough people to where they can't really know what everybody's desires and wants are, right? So you're looking at a planning kind of capacity, and you're often it's talked about in terms of monetary policy, like what's the right interest rate, what's the proper amount of money to produce, what's the right policy move to get to the goal we have, whether that's boosting inflation or boosting employment or boosting GDP, right? So all these questions have these knowledge dimensions to them, and it's complicated, right? So what Hayek's contribution to this discussion was to show that it's through competition and through the price system, through entrepreneurship, and through really through prices, through cost accounting, economic calculation made possible through prices, that we learn in this kind of like almost in like a laboratory setting where you do a bunch of stuff and you get data, right? And then you make conclusions about that after the fact, and you do a new round of experiments and you get a new round of data, right? Well, that's what prices are. They for people who are engaging in production decisions or consumption decisions or investment decisions, they look at these prices and they figure out what are the trade-offs, what are the margins of trade-offs that are available here given the system, and then they act given their own private knowledge of what they want and what's best for them in that context. And that is something that is not replaceable outside of that process. Like somebody sitting afar with a calculator trying to reason through in their own head what would make everybody else better off. And the reason that can't be achieved is because there's this big gap between what they know and what they need to know to make those decisions efficiently. And that because it's always changing, and the information's in the mind of all the actors embedded, right? And so that's the knowledge. That's briefly stated the knowledge problem, and it faces monetary planners just as much as it faces anybody else. They're having to decide how to coordinate the monetary system such that it makes it possible for 1,000,000, 300, 400, however many millions and millions of people are involved, such that they are able to coordinate their actions and achieve their goals without being frustrated. There's a lot of people. They all have cross purposes, and there's a lot of different, it's not an easy question. And you can think of that complicating question as being even more difficult and even more complicated when you start saying, well, how many different kinds of money should there be? Right. Just 1, 2, 5, 10? Should it be gold, silver?
We've already seen Bitcoin wrapped and put on different networks, right? We've already seen US dollars or other digital assets wrapped and put on different networks. So we already see this melding, this adding of value, taking value and locking it up and putting on other networks. So there's already an organic shared value, evolutionary on different
process chains happening here.
And some of these chains may turn out to just be a waste, and they may go down, and the value on them may, a lot of it, get eaten up. And that's how you learn and grow and find out the ones that aren't, and what went wrong.
But can you imagine a world where that plays out and we're left with just one without some sort of an artificial limitation on the whole thing? I don't think so either.
It had to be a limitation because we actually already see a market of thriving alternatives that are there to help. And that's what we get. Although we're not Bitcoin maximalists for many reasons, we just don't see it as a natural, organic outcome.
Yeah.
And we're for the natural, organic outcome of the technology and it growing and being most effective to people worldwide in this potential outreach.
And I feel like that points to a whole basket of these currencies, right? Not just one, but a whole basket, because of the fact, first of all, it takes a lot of whenever people really got into Bitcoin back in 17, 16, I remember the transaction costs for buying things were high. It could be like $12 to $15 to $20. And that was, back when Bitcoin was, a lot lower than now, right, just to send money. Right. And it could take an hour, 30 minutes, an hour sometimes. So imagine standing at the coffee at Starbucks, you're paying for your venti coffee, which is already too expensive. Yeah, it's not set up for that.
People still know that it's not. So they have Lightning, these other networks and solutions to put on top.
But now imagine that problem in a world where people are all using Bitcoin. I mean, I don't think the Lightning network's going to do it. You're going to need more like, well, maybe, but it's a big problem. And I feel like it's going to be more than just one. I mean, look at Visa, MasterCard, and Discover, and these are all centralized ledgers that could easily scale up to handle all of the transactions of their competitors, right? Through just creating more servers and hiring more people.
Well,
But
you can
even
also
but even
look
then you
at
have competition.
and you can also you look at the centralization of the servers of how Bitcoin's mined and produced. You can also look at the wallets. It's very centralized in wallet holdings. You know,
Sure.
you look at how much is held in Satoshi Nakamoto's wallet and other wallets from the beginning. Like there's
Right.
large amounts of this. And you can find, I would argue, you can look at creations like Hex, really, Hex or Wise. You can look at other creations on smart contract platforms that are able to achieve a more harmonious, decentralized outcome. Like I would say what Richard Hart did with Hex on the time value.
Yes.
That's like what I would like.
Revolutionary.
That's revolutionary. What I would like to see with how money is rewarded out, not to people who hold these huge minor banks and can afford the resources. It's no longer, but to anyone who locks up value over time has equal share to that delayed gratification. I mean, that's
you're right. And I think let's talk about that, because the functions or the properties of money we've read about earlier did not include anything about the ability to lock it up over time,
right?
To have that temporal layer where you can take something and commit it through time and get something else greater on the other end, right? To do that with gold or with fiat money or with any of the other forms of money that have come before, it always required going to some counterparty, some intermediary, and saying, hey, make a promise that you will live up to this agreement, right? This interest, this contract.
Even with Bitcoin or Ethereum or one of these others, you still have to give them up to another party if you were ever to get a return on them.
But now we're talking about a digital asset that has the ability through code to interact with a contract out of your wallet without giving up custody of your tokens, controlling your keys, no third parties, and you can take advantage of this time value function and stake or commit these resources over time and get an interest rate out of that. So that is revolutionary. And if we could add the privacy layer to that, then you got something pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Now you're talking. Yeah. Now you've got something revolutionary.
And for those who are worried about the energy debate on Bitcoin crypto, which when we look at the overall drain of fiat and energy and misallocation of resources, I don't feel that it's a big drain compared to what we've talked about as funded. About it. But that being said, when you look at a project that's built on a proof of stake chain, like
it's so much more efficient,
which innovated this time value function, it's energy, the efficiency on that is,
and energy is not likely to become, I mean, this is far out, my opinion, so don't take this with any grain of seriousness, but I don't believe that energy is going to get cheaper. Yeah, listen, anyway, I don't think it's going to get cheaper in the future. I don't think we're going to look forward in 50 years and say, oh, wow, we really got cheap energy now.
Sure.
And if we do, it's through some kind of crazy technology that I don't see coming. Right. But if the
proof of windmills and solar panels, you're saying?
Probably not, no. Okay. So if the proof of work is consuming a lot of energy to burden now, what's it going to be in 50 years? And what does that mean for its ability to sustain itself as some kind of, global reserve currency, right? Sure. That you're stuck then back not using the base layer and just using the lightning networks and the layer 2s and all that, right? So, and if that's the future, then I guess it could work perhaps, but otherwise, no.
Well, there's a big, beautiful, thriving market to learn and to do your own research in, because I think we mentioned none of this is financial, commercial, legal, marital advice. It's just us sharing our educational, entertainmental, informational perspectives,
right?
And made up words. And you can check out all the links below, because we usually leave them in the description with some timestamps. And look, there are some of these aren't going to be around, shouldn't be around. Many of them are building out and doing neat, incredible things. It'd be fun to see what decentralized finance, DeFi, NFTs, the world of NFTs, non-fungible tokens, what they're doing with taking, we think of real estate, identification,
Medical records.
medical
Yeah.
records, you go down. I mean, the potential is limitless for its impact in the market, and it's just the beginning. So to allow these other projects to flourish without too much, without being stifled, that's what we'd like to see, a marketplace that's not overly, the term is regulated, but why would, to regulate something that is not understood yet and is just beginning, that we benefit more from allowing it to see it grow and see what works and what doesn't.
Exactly. Yeah. Let's let this discovery process play out before we decide what's the next monetary system, right?
I agree with that. And though we're not maximalists, we are definitely
minimalists.
Yeah. And we do see that Bitcoin is the driver, as the proof of concept that allows for all of these others to exist. So can definitely see it providing maybe a unit of account. And
it could, yeah. But even then, I think that there'll be others, that would emerge. But really just to wrap it all up, I would say Bitcoin was born out of an ethos that was trying to get politics out of money, and for it to be in the hands of people, or some people, or now who are trying to make it into something else, the money of the future, right?
The world reserve currency,
the world reserve,
determined. It's like this.
I feel like they lost the what's that man, what's the term?
Well,
they lost the script, I guess, on it. I don't know.
Yeah. They
missed the point. Because the point is not to centralize this thing, but to have a decentralization of money in general, and that with a little m. I mean that with a little m. And Bitcoin very well may be part of the money of the future, but it doesn't need to be the money of the future. And if that's what we're aiming for, and that's what our goal is, I feel like we've missed something, right? Because it could easily be that future is dystopic if the kind of the things we've walked through tonight were to play out.
Right.
If the blockchain, if the Bitcoin blockchain were to be taken over, and if it was going to be completely about layers and lightning networks, and you were on a registered thing, and you couldn't do anything on your own, you would be living in a financial panopticon, where the monetary authorities would have complete control and the knowledge of everything you did. Kind of weird, kind of perverted. Definitely not the kind of thing.
What was that study? Was it the Stanford study? When you put people in power, I mean, power, the absolute power.
Perverse. Yeah. Well, it's moral hazard.
Yeah.
Even if somebody's not immoral, you tempt them enough with the right kind of incentives, and you can coax them to do immoral things, right? And humans are, we respond to incentives, and we don't respond well to power. We don't do good with power, right? So, yeah, I'd like to see less emphasis on making Bitcoin the next power play for the monetary authorities, and more about how to decentralize the financial world with privacy.
Even in the scripture, there was the temptation of power to Christ, that this whole, you could rule over the whole thing. And Christ is like, yo, dig it. That's not how this world works. I can't. If I rule it, it's not going to work out good. So I'm going to step back. That's not the law, right? That's not how things work, because he understood he didn't have perfect information. Being in charge of everyone was not going to maximize everybody's.
So you mean Jesus was a Hayekian?
Oh God.
Did we just have another book?
You do.
Yes, I'll tackle this one.
Oh man.
All right.
Yeah. So
I see that though. I hear you. I remember reading through that part, and now that you mention it, that does seem to be
really good stuff in the scriptures.
It's a valid read.
Absolutely.
I think
you talk about what do you see on the face of a denarii, but that's for another video. If you like this kind of stuff, then subscribe to the notification bell. And I think we covered the point of what is money, is Bitcoin the money? It's a great evolution and move forward from fiat, where you can just print and fund wars and do a bunch of stuff that you can't when code is law. However, is it the panopticon?
It could be,
solution?
it's definitely, there's no guarantee it's not. And that's a big enough risk right there. Right.
So just be aware of how the technology works. What is a public ledger? And continue learning and doing your own research and enjoying life, because we live in some beautiful times. Life is good. Wherever you are, life is beautiful, and enjoy it. And until the next time, have a beautiful day. Namaste, y'all.
Thank you.